You're watching Euronews now. I'm Takumbo Silako with your top stories. The UK says all options are on the table if an investigation confirms that Russian forces have used chemical weapons in Mariupol. Nearly 4.8 million children have now been displaced by the war in Ukraine. We'll talk to the United Nations about its efforts to deal with a worsening crisis. And as COVID infection cases continue to reach record rates across Europe, one expert tells us that all people testing positive should remain in isolation.
Ukrainian forces are readying themselves for a last battle to control the besieged southern city of Mariupol. Tens of thousands of people have most likely been killed in Russia's assault on the port, according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's also warned of a possible use of chemical weapons by Russian forces in a move to capture Mariupol.
One of the Russian occupier speakers has said that they might use chemical weapons against defenders of Mariupol. We take this very seriously. I'd like to remind the world's leaders that Russia's possible use of chemical weapons has already been discussed. At that moment, it meant that the reaction to the Russian aggression had to be more severe and faster.
An earlier visit by Austria's Chancellor to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin has been criticised by Poland's leader. Karl Nehammer admitted the visit had not gone well.
Generally
speaking, I have no optimism I can take from this meeting with President Putin. The military offensive in the east of Ukraine is already well prepared for.
But Poland's Mateusz Morawiecki was blunt in his opinion of the trip.
At this stage of the war, when Russia has already committed war crimes, one should not talk to the criminals. And I haven't changed my mind on this subject.
This Russian MOD footage is said to show a strike on a Ukrainian armoured vehicle. Western officials expect Russia to try and double or perhaps even treble its forces in Donbass as it shifts troops from Kiev and elsewhere.
UN officials say Ukrainian women need more protection as evidence of rape and sexual violence emerges from areas retaken from retreating Russian forces. Gang rapes, assaults at gunpoint and rapes committed in front of children are among the grim testimonies collected by investigators.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, we are increasingly hearing of rape and sexual violence. These allegations must be independently investigated to ensure justice and accountability. The combination of mass displacement with the large presence of conscripts and mercenaries and the brutality displayed against Ukrainian civilians has raised all red flags.
Elena is one of those women who suffered at the hands of soldiers. Elena, whose name has been changed to protect her identity, accuses 2 Russian soldiers of raping her for 13 hours after being followed out of a shop.
I didn't even have time to go home. I didn't have the time. They entered the door behind me. I didn't have time to take my phone. I didn't have time to do anything. They just silently pushed me on the bed, silently crushed me with the machine gun, undressed me. It was disgusting, very disgusting. I don't want to live.
Rape is considered a war crime and a breach of international humanitarian law. Both Ukraine's Prosecutor General and the ICC have said they will open investigations into reported sexual violence.
The war in Ukraine has boosted Vladimir Putin's popularity in Russia. With an opposition out of action and the independent press muzzled, his image as a strong, determined leader prepared to do whatever it takes to defend his people is steadily growing among Russians.
He works hard and protects our country.
An approval that corresponds exactly to how the Kremlin wishes to be perceived.
I think our elites and Putin himself, they need this kind of approval. So they will do everything to get it, both on the battlefield and on the TV screen.
Leveson believes that lots of people think that Putin started the military operation for internal reasons. According to the polls, since the beginning of the war, his popularity rating has jumped from 63 to 83%. But can we trust these statistics?
Let's imagine they are lying. But since we are measuring these lies for years and years, then the difference between just December and March is, as I told you, 20-something%.
Nevertheless, you can still find people in Moscow who are not afraid to criticize Putin.
I think he's mad.
I don't know why people still like him and why he gains his popularity.
I don't like him. I like him, but we're friends.
Israeli police have shot dead a Palestinian man during a security checkpoint in the West Bank city of Ashkelon this morning. According to law enforcement officials, the deceased, a man in his 40s, resident of Hebron, stabbed an officer who was inspecting his vehicle. There has been a rising tide of violence among Israelis and Palestinians. In the past 3 weeks, a spree of attacks has left 14 people dead. 4 Palestinians were killed on Sunday in separate incidents in the occupied territory, and another 14 were arrested on Monday. A dozen of Israeli army battalions are currently operating in the West Bank.
It's the International Day for Street Children, a day on which campaigners for millions living rough remind us of our responsibilities so that young people's rights are not trampled on. Well, let's talk now to Pia McRae. She's CEO of the charity Consortium for Street Children, and she joins us from London. Well, thanks for taking time to speak to us here on the programme. How would you define street children, and how big a problem is this, and which countries are the worst affected?
Yes, so defining street children, there are many different words used: runaway children, throwaway children. But what we mean by street children are children who depend on the streets for survival. So they sleep on the streets, they perhaps make their livelihoods on the streets, and their families, they may be from families who dwell on the streets. So that's who they are. Data is very difficult. By its nature, they're a group of children who don't appear in census data. It's a fluid population, it's a mobile population. So it's incredibly difficult to get city estimates, let alone country estimates, global estimates, but conservative estimates put the numbers of street children globally in the tens of millions. That's what we're looking at.
Okay, so tell us more about what are the toughest issues they're facing and how they end up becoming or living on the streets.
Yeah, so the context of children ending up on the streets is often, things have gone wrong. So there could be issues around violence, sexual exploitation, poverty, of course, a massive issue for children. But then coming onto the streets, they're also in extremely vulnerable positions. So those problems then get magnified and they are at significant risk. So they're often running from a difficult situation into a more precarious situation.
I imagine the pandemic has not done anything at all to help the problem. Tell us more about the impact and what people can do to help.
So the pandemic has been really difficult for children on the street. It stopped their livelihoods if they were managing to eke together some money on the streets to survive. But measures to respond to the pandemic hit them particularly hard. So they were subject to very severe lockdowns and retribution where they couldn't comply with those lockdowns, often being forced off the street and put into very difficult situations, but then not being able to access often support that was being given to other people. So many children on the street don't have ID documents. Often rations were dependent on that. So finding themselves in a very challenging situation through the pandemic without the support that other children were getting.
The Hollywood actor Johnny Depp returns to the courts today to take on his ex-wife Amber Heard in a new defamation battle, this time in the United States. We'll have more details of that after this break.